everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Good. And let's hope we can make the world a better place to live in peace and prosperity.
Good idea.
But we are being challenged. There's a few shortcomings in our foreign policy. There's a few shortcomings in our monetary policy. Yeah. There's a few shortcomings in our spending policy. And even though spending a lot of money and printing a lot of money might give you a sense that things are doing well, but if you're looking a little bit more into the distant future, you know, foreign policy and our policy here and our economic policy has consequences. Yeah. And just like this past week, big things have just happened rather suddenly because the fragility of our economic system seems to be shaken by, you know, a virus. Yeah. You know, but that remains to be seen on what's happening. But on foreign policy, I think the most important thing we can talk about today is the rockets that hit Baghdad in the green zone and hit the embassy. Yeah. And the big question is who's hitting our place, and that's our stuff. And you know, it's not going to go unnoticed, and the neocons are going to be there, and our president is going to be very interested in this as well. But it's a big event. It's been done before to hit in the green zone, but there's a little bit more animosity in the whole region because the United States assassinated an Iranian in Iraq, Soleimani, and there's a lot of feeling about that, and so there's this resentment that people are striking out, and the first question we all ask is, wonder who did it and what is the consequence of this? I think the consequence is going to be very serious. I think whatever happens, you know, there's going to be a solidification of power between Iraq and Iran, and which will be a greater challenge to America and America's foreign policy, because it won't be easy to snap their fingers and take care of this. But you know, it could be the militia, it could be the Iranians, it could be the CIA neocons, because you know, the one thing people might think this is defending Iran, but you know they're surrounded and desperate, and we're doing all these things, and we're killing them with all these sanctions on, that they almost morally have the justification of trying to beat their way out of here. But I think they're smart enough to know that this wouldn't be in their best interest. You know, why should they, you know, we're threatening them all the time with war, and for them to do that would be say, bring it on, bring it on. Yeah. I don't think they would do it, but I believe some of their enemies might do it and blame them, and then we'll have an excuse. We're just looking for an excuse to stay because of the recent voting and the people speaking out and the big rally. I mean, the Iraqi people and the Iranians would be together on, just go home. We're tired of you, and we don't need you here. And of course, I made that suggestion a few years ago. Maybe they'll get serious and do that, but we need to get more Americans saying, "Hey, folks, come on home. This doesn't make any sense. Come on home. We have a few problems here to take care of."
Yeah, it has. It's been a busy weekend in Iraq, and I think the consequences of this will be serious. But it started, you know, on Friday because Muqtada al-Sadr, who controls the largest faction in the Iraqi parliament, he's not just some cleric. He controls the largest faction. He called for a 1 million-man march to protest the continued U.S., they would call it occupation, certainly the U.S. military presence in Iraq. He called for 1 million men, and it looks like 1 million men came out. If you look at some of the pictures, although and you wrote about this too, the U.S. mainstream media wanted to downplay it, only a couple 100,000. But when you see, they say it was 8 kilometers long of protesters. And they all said, go home. So that started. Then he called them back on Saturday, and they dispersed. But to have that ability to get 1 million guys out on the street that quickly shows a lot of power. And then, as you say, and then on Sunday comes this rocket attack actually hitting the embassy complex, apparently hitting a restaurant and wounding someone there in the embassy complex. This is a real escalation, and it shows that really, and don't forget also there are anti-government protests going on in Iraq that continue as well. So I think what we're seeing is Iraq starting to fall apart a little bit more, and the U.S. caught in the middle.
You point out correctly about how powerful al-Sadr is, and yet we haven't heard a lot from him. But, when Fallujah was under attack, he was very much involved, and when the governments were changing, and he had an army of people and a force, I thought, boy, he's a political leader, and we'll hear a lot from him. But, he's been quietly becoming a stronger political leader. Like you say, he's involved in their legislative body. He has a lot of followers, but he hasn't been demanding revolution or anything else. But this is the first time since 04. 04 is, I think, the siege on Fallujah, which was a really big deal. But he's become more vocal now, and that means to me that it is getting to be a hotter issue on which way Iraq's going to go. Are we going to leave? And who's going to be in charge of Iraq? And how will the Iraqis do with the Iranians? And I think it's going to be resolved. I don't think the status quo is going to be maintained. I think it's very unstable there, and there's going to be a lot of hostilities, people causing injuries, and not taking. Some will take the blame for it, and some will use it just to stir it up. But it's unfortunate that our position will be rather. Determined to stay regardless. Yeah, we'll back off a little bit. But, when they were building that embassy and had that green zone, there's no way we're going to walk away from an embassy that's the size of the
Vatican.
The Vatican.
Yeah.
No, we're going to walk away. So we're going to be there, and we're going to keep getting messages. There's going to be a lot more than that. Now, I think Sadr's indicating that he was not responsible, and there's reason to believe him. But for these bombings over the weekend. So, but those aren't the last ones we're going to hear about. This is going to continue.
Yeah, and it's Sadr is not an easy target for the U.S. either, because you can't paint him as just another pro-Iranian stooge, because he's not. He doesn't like the Iranian influence in Iraq.
He wants them out.
He wants them out too, and so it's not an easy thing. I would guess that there's a lot of infiltration, CIA infiltration of his movement, trying to split it, and we're seeing different factions in the movement. But he was pretty explicit on Friday. He said, "Okay, we need a timetable to leave. We're going to let you get out in an orderly manner. But if you refuse to do this, you're going to be a target. You're going to be a target of this resistance." So the combination of his ability to call so many people out and get them fired up, and his demand for the U.S. to leave, it's going to have some people sweating, I think, in the U.S. establishment, and I don't know what they're going to do about it.
No, and there will be another surprise, I am sure. But the goal is, of course, to get America out of there, and that is not going to happen gracefully, even though it's in our best interest.
Yeah.
We don't argue this because we think it's in the interest of Russia, Iran, or somebody else. We do it because it's in our interest. But there's more and more people, talking our way. We had the group in Veterans Against Bring Our Troops Home. And McKnight was in, and also there was a neat little article today I saw by the Lieutenant Governor of Idaho, Janice McGeechan. This is fantastic. I mean, the article, we could have written it. It was fantastic, and the whole theme of her article was just bring the troops home. She had all the points correct.
Yeah.
And so we want to compliment people like that have that position. But I think there's a lot more people out there now than ever before. I think there were a lot, when I started in the presidential races, but nobody was allowed to say anything. Now I think that there's more people saying it, and more people saying it is, another 8-10 years, it's worse than ever. It's time we change the policy. And the policy is to change is, get ourselves, in the direction of non-intervention, mind our own business and talking to people and trading with people, but to use the weapons of war and, freezing assets, threaten with weapons, using drones, assassinations. This is no way to work for peace. I mean, this is just a deliberate attempt to, I imagine there's a lot of people believe this is what has to be done. But a lot of people use that, patriotic excuse that we're doing it for the good of America and our freedoms. But quite frankly, many people are blinded if they think this is really, that policy we have in the Middle East since 2003 has been a benefit to anybody. I just think that the American people are starting, and we have to keep after them to wake up and let their legislators know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the question Americans will have, well, what are we doing in Iraq? And the purpose, the stated purpose was, well, ISIS is there. But those scare tactics aren't going to work anymore because ISIS is essentially defeated. There's no big ISIS somewhere. And even the U.S., and you mentioned this too, even the U.S. military leaders say, well, ISIS is really not a threat anymore. So why are we there? The only reason we were there is to fight ISIS. And I think if more Americans start questioning that, they're going to come to the conclusion that it's not about ISIS. The troops are there because the neocons want war with Iran. Good thing on our side is the Americans do not want war with Iran. If you look at any poll across the board, and that's why they have to manufacture these different kinds of events. They conned Trump into assassinating Soleimani by telling him, oh, this is going to actually make things a lot better. It's going to be more peaceful. The Iranians are going to rise up against their leaders if you kill this guy, when the opposite happens. So Americans need to wake up and see that we're not there for any good reason, and a lot of American troops are getting killed and are going to get killed for no good reason.
Yeah, and your point is correct. We had to go in there, according to their philosophy, we had to get rid of ISIS. But what about, who was in there before we went in there in 2003? There was no ISIS and there was no Al-Qaeda. We used that as an excuse and a lie, to get involved. And then then they do come in. Then we have to fight them to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And it just goes on. And they'll come back. They'll come back. As long as we stay there, they're not going to allow us to, just get away with all this. They're fighting for their homeland. It's so much more dramatically visible in Afghanistan because they have such a tradition.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to, overtake us. But I think the whole region is like that. Why shouldn't the Iraqis want to live in their country, and why shouldn't the Iranians have to live in their own country? And then they say, well, they need to join us. They need to act like a civilized nation. And that I find that pretty cold.
Yeah, especially considering our behavior. Well, there's going to be a lot of blame thrown at these popular mobilization forces, which the U.S. says are Iran-backed, and to the extent that they are, they're Shia militias, essentially. They've issued a statement denying responsibility for the embassy attacks. They said, no, we didn't do it. That, of course, would justify more U.S. assassinations if they're found to have done it, so the next guy in line could be in trouble. But the fact is, these sort of low-level warfare, continuous, can make the U.S. presence untenable in Iraq. They don't have to defeat us on the battlefield. Just a few rockets here and there. It'll make it impossible for the U.S. to continue its mission. The troops won't be able to go out in the field and do what they're there to do. They won't feel safe in the embassy. It won't take too much. So if the Iraqis, or at least a very good portion of the Iraqis, are intent on the U.S. leaving, it won't take that much for them to make this happen unless Trump is willing to do Iraq War 3.0 and go in for a full-scale war, which I think they're probably betting, and it's correctly, that he's not going to want to do this in the election season.
That's right. And, my big concern, of course, is the breakdown of our system. And I do believe that our foreign policy is deeply flawed, and that's why we're seeing even more problems, and we're going bankrupt over it, and the moral bankruptcy is becoming apparent, and the people are losing confidence. They're not going to tolerate all the lies. But I know we're talking about Iran on Iraq, but this other thing that happened too just today or yesterday was the Taliban.
Yeah.
Shot down an American plane. First they said, that was probably a passenger plane, something happened. No, it turned out it was an American, and they have proof of this.
Yeah,
an
spy plane. Yeah.
American spy plane. They said, they had some CIA agents on the plane. I can't believe that, and so that once again, if they're able to do this and get these rockets to shoot down our planes, they've been motivated, they've been stimulated, they've been encouraged by us assassinating a leader when he's in a foreign country, with all the pretense that this is going to bring peace.
Yeah, and it's significant, and you won't hear this on the media. This is why you should tune into the Liberty Report. But the U.S. has lost 5 aircraft in Afghanistan just in January.
Wow.
4 helicopters and now this spy plane. It is significant. It also suggests, this is at E-11A, it also suggests that the Taliban may have some rockets that can go higher than we thought, because this is a pretty high altitude aircraft. So again, it doesn't take much of these kinds of things before the U.S. position will be untenable. I would just close by saying what I'm watching now is reports that the U.S. is seeking to carve out a Sunni state within Iraq, and there are some indications that might be true. As the Iraqi parliament was voting to kick the U.S. out, the Sunni factions were not present in parliament. They actually were up in Erbil, the Kurdish region. They were meeting with U.S. officials, and there's some speculation that they're plotting how to break away. This will probably be the neocon last stand in Iraq to rip the country apart, to keep Iran from getting any more of it, which their actions in the first place caused Iran to get it. So that's what Dr. Paul and I are going to keep our eye on. I will say that we're going to have some announcements soon. Spring is just around the corner. Of course, that means RPI conferences and events and activities. So watch this space. We'll have some announcements pretty soon. And again, always remember, please, to subscribe to this channel. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org and also subscribe to our updates there to keep yourselves informed, and also to have some special offers on our events.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. And I think that's an important issue that Daniel mentions about the Sunnis and the Shia carving out different areas by outsiders coming in and us being involved and divvying up the oil. That's bad. But we have to remember the mess occurred over there when the boundary lines were designed by outsiders, Westerners, Europeans, and Americans after World War I, and you've had these problems ever since. But if there's a country like Iraq or any one of them, and they voluntarily, divide their land up and have some agreements, but it has to be spontaneous and it has to be on agreement. But when the outsiders come in and say, okay, we think it's a good idea that the Sunnis go here and they can control the oil and this sort of thing, that's where the real problem is. But I don't think it'd be anything wrong. I like that, going back into difference. Instead, we used to be 13 different countries at one time. And now we have a monolith in Washington, and that doesn't exist anymore. So I think going back in that other direction would be a good idea, but unfortunately there are too many outsiders there, and al-Sadr was right in taking his position. He says, we just don't want the Americans out. We want the Iranians out of Iraq as well. Yes, it's non-intervention. It should be cooperation, all voluntary, and that would make a big difference on all world affairs. But right now we're moving in the wrong direction, but it's coming to an end because we've consumed our wealth, and everything is done on borrowed money, and little events sometimes can shake up the troops, and it won't take a whole lot to bring our economy down because the continuation of the weakening of our foreign policy will also weaken the dollar, and this will come as a conclusion, and we will have to change what we're doing. We'll have to change our monetary policy, our economic policy, and our foreign policy. The big question is, are we just going to move in the direction of a vicious, violent dictator telling us everything, or are we going to move toward the path of individual liberty, which this country was intended to do? I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.